Okay, this is going to be an off the cuff for MadeByRuben, and it's going to be a personal story. I hope it gives him some enlightenment. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe he'll agree with it, maybe he won't disagree with it. But I hope you'll take it in the light of maybe not education, but as useful material, so you can have a better understanding of baby boomers, what it's like to be a boomer, in the environment that we grew up in, because we're talking about integration. And I want to say integration and what we went through in the 60s and into the 70s is not as clean and crisp as people would like to believe that it was. And the only way that I can give you more insight, rather than going to a book or a lecture or a historical speaker, is give you a personal account of growing up in the 60s. And as a baby boomer, a late baby boomer, I wasn't born in 46, so, I grew up in the civil rights era. I was too young to participate in it, but I grew up in it. I vaguely remember the Watch riots. I remember the little house we lived on in the ghetto, in the inner city community. And I remember my mother getting up and turning off all the lights. I remember people shouting in the street, men shouting in the streets. At the age of 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, I don't remember very much of it. I remember my parents being afraid and not going outside and not going into the streets. That's about it, all that I remember of it. So even though I lived through the civil rights movement, so to speak, I don't remember it very well. So I don't remember the sit-ins and the marches and all that stuff. My first memory of what the civil rights actually meant was when Martin Luther King was shot and he was killed. And then right after that, in Los Angeles, the news reports of Bobby Kennedy being shot and killed. And then the pictures of the Chicago Democratic riots and stuff like that. I had memories of that I had an understanding that there was something going on. But my experience with integration, okay, I would say for the first 4 years of going to an inner city school, being in Los Angeles, where your neighborhoods are rough, it's unsafe to walk to the corner store without being mugged or getting into a fight. I mean, even though Los Angeles wasn't Chicago or New York, and we were fairly spread out, and the violence was fairly spread out, I do remember a few children my age being killed. Local violence because kids couldn't get along. I remember being small and being mugged, basically robbed by older kids. The violence in the neighborhood was always present. It's just what it was. You grow up in it, you adapt to it. Every neighborhood you move in, you have to figure out how to navigate in it. It's the way it is in the Black community. It didn't start with me, with us. It wasn't perpetuated by us. It's just the way it actually was. I remember the educational system wasn't great. I would say, as far as I could tell, it was decent, because basically I didn't know the difference. All I know is that they saw me as a gifted child in the early 60s. So by the time 1968, when I was about 9 years old, my mother put me on a bus one day, a school bus one day, early in the morning. She woke me up early in the morning because I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 hours earlier than my normal time, because in my local neighborhood school was only a couple of blocks away. But for whatever reason, I had to get up at 5 in the morning, I had to get dressed, and I had to get put on a bus going cross town to a semi-affluent white school district. Walk in and see all these white faces. Had never really had contact with white people in my black neighborhood. Black neighborhoods were like, well, they call it Bantustans in South Africa. Very isolated, separated communities. The only white people you saw were basically police. And obviously the people on TV were all white. But to actually come in contact with white people was rare. And I do mean extremely rare. Back then, you didn't even have white teachers teaching in the inner city community for the most part. And definitely you didn't have males for the most part teaching in the black community. It was all females, all mostly black females. And of course, the associated schoolyard violence on a daily basis because of frustration and also entertainment. That's how black kids entertain themselves. You know, some kid, they push up a fight, and some kids would actually get out and they're fighting. People would crowd around just like it's a prize fight. And that was entertainment in the black community. It is what it is. So being put on a bus, driven an hour across town and deposited into a white school with a bunch of white faces was foreign to me. How they spoke, how they acted, what they read, all this stuff. So I went from being a gifted black kid in a black school to a mediocre student in a white school. And that's when I immediately noticed the difference in the level of education. I immediately noticed the difference in the way white schools were appointed and policed, and my schools, like night and day. Thankfully, I was too young to be afraid. I was too young to know what was going on around me. My mama stuck me on a bus and sent me across town with no explanation. But that's the way it was back then. Your parents didn't give you an explanation. They didn't sit down and talk to you about what it was. They decided what you were going to do. They pointed you in a direction and you just did it. Otherwise, you'd face the consequences. That's the way it was for baby boomers, because most black parents came from the South, came from farms, and most black parents didn't have educations past the 8th grade. It's just what it was. So to get back to the story, I'm having to adapt to white culture, adapt to white people. I have to listen to white racist jokes on a daily basis, because these are the jokes that the parents tell their children or tell around their children. And guess what? They need to come to school just like any other kids do and report what their families are saying. So I go from never hearing a racist joke from white people to hearing it constantly on a daily basis. Fortunately, Los Angeles in California was and is still fairly liberal. So the racism that I faced wasn't oppressive and was not harsh. So I can't speak to the kids that go to school in the South. I'm sure they had it a lot tougher than I did. But there were always challenges. Adapting to a school system, adapting to a foreign culture. And trust me, it was foreign. You go to an affluent white suburb, and your little white friend invites you over to his house, and he has a 3-story house on the beach. And you come home and that kid has more stories on his house than you have bedrooms in your house. That is culture shock. And every day you have to come from an affluent white neighborhood back to the ghetto, the inner city neighborhood that you live in. You come from a safe white suburb back to the violent black suburb, black Bantustan that you come from. So you adapt. You go to school, you make friends with the white people. You start adapting some of their culture. You listen to their music. You get educated. You have to read strange things that you Never thought you would read. And fortunately, I was a gifted child, so I could adapt. I could adapt quickly. It didn't take me long to catch up to where the white kids were, and in some cases surpass where they were. So in that point of fact, I was fortunate. But what the thing is about integration is integration wasn't seen as something that was negative. At least by me as a kid, at least by being me as a boomer. It was seen as an opportunity. It was seen as an opportunity to escape the dire straits that you were in, even if it was only for a few hours. It was seen as by my mother and father as a way to pull me and my family out of the situation we were in. As I say, I had a upper class education as far as being bused. That was an advantage. That was the advantage of integration. Those were the fruits of integration. That we had an opportunity to have access to something like that. Access to something that most people, even some poor white people, didn't have access to. So that's something that I took, regardless of the stuff that I had to go through. So as I grew, as I was educated, and as I adopted some of the things from white culture, when you come back to your side of town, and you don't speak the same way anymore, you don't view the same. Your worldview is not the same as the black folks that were on the other side of town. You have nobody to talk to. Black folks don't talk politics. Black folks don't really like to read. Black folks don't read the same books that you read. You are mocked, as Sergeant Willie P. says, for being a quote unquote uppity Negro. Because you don't speak the same way. You're laughed at. You're laughed at on one side because you talk funny, you don't quite fit in anymore. And on the other side, you're laughed at because you're black. At the end of the day, you're black. And as you get older in that white system, when their racism really starts to kick in and they notice the color, you notice the separation. You notice how they treat you. You notice how your little white friends that you were friends with when you were 8, 9, and 10, all of a sudden they ain't your friends when you get 15, 16, and 17. But you have to bring back the fruits of integration. Those are the negatives. I'm going to give you the positives. We grew up near Watts. In fact, my first few years were in Watts. You know, Watts wasn't but a stone's throw away, a couple miles away. You know, when those riots wasn't but a stone throws away from where I lived. Lived in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the black community, where you literally fought every day. Literally fought every day. Fighting was not an option. Okay? And I personally wanted to escape that shit. I was glad I escaped that shit. But the positive thing is that because of me getting my black ass up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, getting on that cold ass, standing on that cold ass stoop, waiting for that cold ass bus ride for an hour to a white neighborhood, to a white neighborhood that didn't really like you and didn't really accept you. Because of me, my brothers and sisters, the 4 ones that were under me, were able to go. And they were able to partake of that same education. And they were able, for a poor black family that didn't have anything, could barely feed us. We had 5 children. 2 meals a day was all we got because that's all we could afford. The lights were constantly being shut off. Paying bills was difficult. 2 black people that come from the South with eighth grade educations can barely read. And trust me, And when I tell you that they could barely read, okay, I'm not exaggerating. They could barely read. My reading level when I was 10 years old, my reading level exceeded my parents. Okay? Let me tell you that. Because of integration. And this is just me. This is my personal story. They were able to give their children an upper middle class education with no money. And because of that, I was able to give my children a better education. I was better able to educate them. I was better able to steer them in the right direction, even against the woman that I made it with, who didn't have who had more money. Her parents had way more money than my parents did, who went to an inner city school and didn't have anywhere near the education that I have or that my siblings had. Nowhere else on earth could that have ever happened, where a poor ass black family with no money, barely able to feed their children, could actually give their children an upper middle class education. So while integration has negatives, and I'm not saying that it doesn't, because it does, it did a hell of a lot more good than it did bad. Trust me. I don't have to prove it to you. The numbers show it. 70% of black folks were in poverty in 1960. By the time 1970 rolled around, it had dropped to 20%. And it's basically remained there. So you have drugs, you have cultural dysfunction, you got a whole lot of other bullshit that went along with forced integration. But if you weigh the positives and the positives much more outweigh the negatives. Was it a perfect solution? No, I would never tell you that it was a perfect solution. Was there a lot of negatives? I would tell you, yes, there was a lot of negatives. But if you put them on a scale compared to what it was in 1950, compared to what we had to go through with Jim Crow, compared to the level of education and the level standard of living that we had before that, bruh, it ain't even close. And if trust me, looking at everything that we went through when we had to go through, if the situation was the same and this was the only avenue to get our people out of the condition that they're in, I would take it in a heartbeat 10 times out of 10. The boomers aren't gods. The civil rights generation, they aren't perfect. They're human beings just like everybody else. They grasp at the only straws that they could to pull their people up. And any civil rights person looking back on it will tell you that those are the only shoelaces that we have to pull up with. If you look at the numbers, hell, before 1960, less than 50% of black males or black people, period, graduated from high school. Most people dropped out in 8th grade. Your high school graduation has doubled in the 50 years. When I was a kid, a college graduate was rare amongst the black community, and I do mean rare amongst the black community. Now you got 20% of black people graduating from college, down from less than 5%. That's a 400% increase. You can't argue with the numbers. You could not sit on a corporate board as a black person when I was a kid. Now you got tons of us sitting on corporate boards, tons of us working in corporate America. That didn't exist 50 years ago. I'm not saying that it's perfect. The thing is that you have the opportunity. You have access to it. As a millennial, you have access to everything that we couldn't even dream about when we were a kid. We could not dream about it when we were a kid. The best we had as a kid for entertainment was the few toys that we could get at Christmas. We only got one or two, and old black and white TV. That was it. And the one or two poor meals that your mother could scrape up. That was it. We couldn't even dream of what you guys dream. Our dreams, your opportunities are bigger than our dreams. I'm going to tell you that. As a millennial, your opportunities are bigger than our dreams. What you guys have available for you in front of you, as far as you can travel the world. You can set up businesses in 104 countries. You have access to information all over the world. You don't have three channels that like we had. All the baby boomers tried to do was keep their families together, keep their families fed, work as hard as you could, and hope for the best. Our dreams were small. My dream when I was a kid is to get an education, get a decent job, so that I could raise a decent family. That was it. Raise a better family than I had. Have my children to have a better opportunity than I had. That's all I dreamed about. I didn't dream about conquering the world. I didn't dream about starting corporate businesses. I didn't dream about a black-owned nation. I didn't dream about that. That was not on my scope. That was for white people. That's what white people did. As a black person in my family structure, to be able to raise a decent family, put food on the table, have a decent house, and decently educate my children was the best that I could dream of. You're a different generation. Your dreams should be higher or greater. Because the things that you can do are greater than it was when I was a kid. When I was an adult. When I was a kid, as a baby boomer, my parents wanted me to go to work at 13 years old. They didn't give a damn about my education because they saw no value in it, especially for boys. They saw no value in educating boys. And it's probably still the case. There's very little value in educating a black boy. That's the nation, and that is the black community. Saying that baby boomers dropped the ball. There was no ball to drop. The fact that you can do what you can do is the legacy of the baby boomers, that you have access. That's all we fought for. That was all that was given to us, is access. Those jobs that we had in a factory because you didn't need a college education is because that was the standard back then. It was a different time. Can we look back and say there's some things that we should have done? Sure, we can. But you cannot judge a man without judging the time that he existed in. That is a fact in history. Anybody can look back and say what should have been done. You see that in sports all the time. You should look at it on instant replay and say he should have done this. He shouldn't have thrown the ball. He should have handed the ball to Marshawn Lynch. Yeah, you can on replay, you know that, but at the time when you calling it, it don't happen that way. This is real time. History is in real time. Boomers don't make any excuses for it. It is what it is. We did what we did. We did the best we could with what we had. And our legacy to you is not businesses. It's not a thriving black community. It's not black people out there kick ass and conquering the world, because that wasn't possible and it still isn't. What we fought for is to give you the best shot that we could, which is all any parent can do for their child. I tell that to my own children. The only thing that I can do is give you the best shot at a decent life that I can. And you have to use your strength, your talents, and your muscle and your intellect and whatever whatever opportunities and resources that are in your environment to do the best you can. And black kids don't do that. I can tell you that now. Black kids don't come close to using the resources that they have. We didn't give you anything better because we didn't have it. We didn't have it. We weren't martyrs. No parent, and you guys, y'all should know, you guys are not laying down. You expect us to lay down and be martyrs for you. Most of y'all don't even have children. You're complaining that we weren't martyrs for you, and y'all don't even have children. You don't have wives. You don't have families. You can only judge somebody when you've done it better. That's not the case. And that's the only thing I can say about it. Don't talk about it. Be about it. Do it. Take the vast resources that you have, and I do mean they're vast, and do something with it. We did what we could with what we knew and what we had to work with. That's it. That door is shut. Your door is open. Your opportunities are here. Take them. Do something with them. Your generation was what we hoped for. Your generation was hope that we could open the fucking door and y'all could walk through it. That's all we gave you. That's all we wanted to give you. Open the goddamn door so that y'all could walk through it. We weren't supposed to build a strong black community. We weren't supposed to build strong black businesses. You were. You are supposed to do that. We were only supposed to lay the groundwork, lay the foundation for you to do it. Keep these crazy ass crackers off your back long enough so that y'all can do your thing. Educated, get you educated enough so that y'all can do your thing. Now you're educated. The crackers are relatively off your back. You got all these resources and opportunities. We laid the groundwork. Now it's up to you guys to do the work. You guys have to put up the buildings. There was no way that we could have done it back then. And now that we're passing on in age, we can't do it anymore. And all I'm telling millennials and Gen Xers to do, stop crying about what mommy and daddy didn't give you or couldn't give you. We got the same fucking pathology that you do. Nobody fixed our culture. We survived our culture. We survived our families. We survived our neighborhoods. Hoping, praying that y'all would be better. Like any parent would. We hoped and prayed that hopefully if we did the best we could, hopefully if we survived enough through this crazy ass country that we live in. The country didn't change. The country got worse. Okay? Got more screwed up, more crazy. The laws got crazy. And we would hope that through all this craziness, that if we got you to the other end and you survived and you got educated, that you would do better than we did. And that's all we hope. And we still hope that. So I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know how you're going to take this. I don't know whether you're going to incorporate this or delete it. And, at this point, you know what? I'm 56 years old. Really don't give a shit. Okay. To be honest with you, I really don't give a shit. I have maybe 20 years. I have hopefully 20 years left, and there's no guarantee. I might only have 5 years left, and I'm not going to live it worrying about what y'all do or how many fingers you point at us. It is what it is. These are the opportunities that you have. You don't have to fight through dogs to get them. You don't have to beat up no crackers to do it. All you got to do is figure out a way around their attitudes. All I can say is get out there, work your ass off,